Well, this video did better than expected. What better way to capitalize on it than by doing the exact same thing again with the sequel, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Infinite Wealth is bigger and more bombastic than Yakuza 7 in almost every way, but I'm still gonna see if my monkey brain can scroll Twitter while the game plays itself for me. The rules of this run will be mostly the same from Yakuza 7. All of the restricted actions from that run still apply here, namely, attacking, using skills, guarding, perfect guarding, summoning pound mates, using items in battle,
If I had one!
swapping party members in battle, changing the auto battle setting from be adaptable, healing from the menu, using items in the menu, changing equipment, swapping party members from the menu, purchasing items or equipment, doing any minigames or side activities, changing jobs, and upgrading weapons. Some additional Infinite Wealth exclusive actions include using tag team attacks, using Dragon's Resurgence, and moving in battle. Plus some other stuff that I'm almost definitely forgetting. I also forgot to mention this in the Yakuza 7 video, but I won't be collecting any items from the ground or from locked boxes either. The only thing I'm allowed to do apart from any tutorials is use the standard auto battle function with whatever the game decides to give me. One crucial change made in Infinite Wealth is that you unlock the auto battle function far earlier. The first few encounters are still tutorials, but you're able to use it as soon as you team up with Sayako. Now, if you watched the Yakuza 7 version of this challenge, you know how I feel about Sayako when it comes to an auto battle only run. Luckily, her incompetence isn't much of an issue here, at least for right now. This doesn't really matter, as the Ichiriz is so abhorrent that he scares her off, and Ichiban is on his own for a little while longer. This applies to the first sort of boss of the run versus Asakura. Ichiban was level 3, while Asakura was level 5. But this fight is still balanced around you only having Ichiban, so it was easy. Apparently the game starts you out with a couple healing items, which help him out, and also, this game has a lot of new mechanics that are generally going to work in our favor. The new collateral damage system, where you can knock enemies into other enemies to hit them as well, gives us more bang for our buck with our attacks. And you now regain MP by using basic attacks, a skill which previously only Nanba had access to. After Ichiban's fateful run-in with the big titty VTuber, the boys are back in town. After a couple more encounters, we make our way to the chief of the homeless camp. First order of business is basically the same first order of business from the last video. We have to break into Seiryu HQ. But this time, we can't just go through the front door. After swimming through literal piss and shit, we end up going through the sewers. This is the game's first dungeon, and I went into it at level 8. The dungeon itself was rather easy, but I was a bit worried about the long battle following it. Despite being a retrace of the Seiryu long battle from Yakuza 7, this was much easier, though that may be due to how early on this one is. The long battle is capped off with the first actual boss fight of the game against this random Seiryu goon named Kooky. Considering that this is the first boss, he's stupidly easy. Even after the QTE when he summons a ton of goons, it's still a walk in the park. Oh! Yeah, so about QTEs, in the previous video, I stated, maybe I'll have stricter rules regarding QTEs in Infinite Wealth. My rules for QTEs for this run is that I must fail them no matter what. The only exception is if the QTE is absolutely required to beat the fight, though that really only applies for one of them. To my surprise, failing a QTE isn't actually all that harmful. In this fight, for example, it only causes Ichiban to take 30 damage. With that fight, the long battle is complete, and Ebina brings us to the storage facility where we meet none other than Joe Sawashiro. He's back, and despite how pissed at me he is, for now, we're in Hawaii! Ichiban's all alone for now, so hopefully that won't be a problem. This is a video game though, so of course it is. The taxi driver tries to rob Ichiban, but he's not having it. This guy's only level 7, and while he did pack a bit of a punch, it was still no sweat for Ichiban to do on his own.
Officer, help! I will...
Spaghetti!
Alright, smart guy, put your bombs in the air and
Fingers!
We end up going back to this guy's house, but these guys don't seem to like that very much. Turns out, it's the gang that the taxi driver runs with, and this Asian John Wick cosplayer tries to kill you over it. This is Yamai, and it's the first fight to actually be somewhat interesting. Yamai has the special ability to attack twice at once, which is really rough for us. Luckily, Ichiban will magically receive buffs throughout this fight that will help him overcome the odds. The way that my attempt at this fight went is that Ichiban easily cleared out the goons in the beginning, but it started looking bad once Yamai himself tagged in. Ichiban was fairly low, and Yamai is able to wipe out a third of his health in one turn. It almost seems like the game knew this, however, as Ichiban decided to use the sandwich we were forced to buy earlier in order to heal himself back up to full. Even when he got low again, some divine act of God gave him another full heal. The mid-fight sequence in this fight doesn't even involve a QTE, which means that he got some free damage, and it even left Yamai on the ground long enough for him to close out the fight with a grounded attack. After this, Ichiban pays a visit to Akane's house, and that finishes Chapter 2. So starting in Chapter 3... fuck, what happened this time? So basically, Ichiban didn't find his mom. Instead, this girl robbed him of everything, including his clothes, and now his Kaksuga Ichi balls are hanging out. Ichi tries to escape, and this leads to a chase segment. This chase is just a glorified cutscene, however, and it will complete itself without any player input whatsoever. Things really start to look up after this though, as we recruit none other than the Dragon of Dojima himself to the party. The first encounter we have with him in tow is the tutorial fight, which teaches us about his battle styles. By the end of the tutorial, Kiryu will be in his beast style, though by the next time we get into a fight, he will return to Brawler, which is the default style. I will not be allowed to switch his style at any time, so he will remain in Brawler for the rest of the game. This isn't a huge detriment at all though. Kiryu is going to be our strongest party member by a huge margin. His default job, the Dragon of Dojima, is a bare-handed class, which means that he will gain greater stat buffs from leveling to compensate for the lack of a weapon. Considering that we can't purchase weapons at all, that's a huge help. Ichi and Kiryu head back to Akane's to do some investigating, but they're interrupted by the return of Yamai. We don't fight him this time, but he does send some of his goons at us. Tomizawa shows up too, but he finally decides to join our side. Tomi's biggest strength is his strong elemental coverage. Right now, he only has battery shock and electric skill, but he will get strong fire and ice skills later on as well. He's a very solid addition to the team. There's another chase segment after this one, though unlike the one earlier, you do actually have to do the button prompts to avoid failing. But I'll just put this under the rule of required QTEs. You still technically don't have to move at all. There's some more tutorials for the Poundmate system and the delivery minigame, but after, we have to go buy some information from this guy named Jeff about what happened to Ichiban's passport. Turns out that Chitose, the girl who robbed him, took it into District 5, a place inhabited by the Barracudas. In order to get in there ourselves, we need to talk to a cop named Roman. His asking price to get the party in is a little outrageous though, so we have to fight him. It became clear very early on that I was quite underleveled for this fight. There was also a secondary problem entirely unrelated to the party members though. Because I bought the deluxe version of this game, I had a crap ton of random revival items that the game just gave to me for free. Since everyone kept dying constantly, the remaining party members spammed these revival items to needlessly drag out a fight they were going to lose. Now, these items weren't really going to help anyway, but I didn't want them to cause the party to win a fight that they couldn't normally beat. Any standard healing items that the game gives me are still fair game though. Because of this, I elected to load a save and use up all of these items in a random encounter. After doing so and leveling everyone up to level 13/14, I retried the fight. Group fights like this one suck because the party doesn't have any good AoE attacks this early on. Compared to Yakuza 7 though, we don't have to overlevel nearly as much. This is due to the fact that this game is piss easy. Just a few more levels made this fight kind of a joke. Roman isn't too crazy of a boss to begin with though. His damage isn't that high, and he won't hit more than one party member at a time usually. His health is also pretty low, so he's a free win. One thing of note is that Ichiban now has access to his healing skill. All of the same caveats to healing from Yakuza 7 apply here, though now the heals are based on proximity rather than being a straight up party-wide heal, which adds some extra RNG into the mix. Right now, this heal is pretty meek. It's tied to Ichiban's kindness level just like in the last game, and though it will level up once or twice naturally over the course of the game, we are not allowed to deliberately increase it. First order of business in Chapter 4 is the weapon upgrading tutorial. Just like in Yakuza 7, while we cannot utilize this service, we are forced to upgrade Ichiban's Hero Bat. It does pretty much the same thing from that game, giving it a moderate stat bonus, but in this game, it also gives it an electric property. Like with any elemental affinity, this is a double-edged sword. Some enemies are weak to electricity, in which case this is a good thing, but some enemies are resistant to it, which makes it less effective. There's the Sujimon tutorial afterwards, which doesn't mean anything because we can't do it, though we are forced to pick a starter. I chose this one because he looks like Hungry Box. After this, I went and did some precautionary grinding to level 19/20 to prepare for the upcoming long battle through the Barracuda hideout. I may have gotten a bit overzealous though, as most of the long battle was easy. By the time anyone started to get even remotely low, we reached a safe area and were able to heal up. This is also where we meet Chitose. She's on our side, at least for now, and she ends up joining the party as our 4th member. Chitose is kinda just okay at fighting. Her damage output is alright, but her real worth comes in her healing skill, which is much more effective than Ichiban's. She even gets a much better one later on. The addition of Chitose to the party makes this long battle even easier. There's a lot of it left, but none of it is really worth commenting on. The long battle is capped off with a fight against the Barracuda's leader, Dwight, where things get a little bit more interesting. Boss fights in Infinite Wealth are still heavily influenced by RNG, though not quite in the same way as they were in Yakuza 7. RNG will generally always work with us instead of against us. Bad RNG won't hurt us too bad, while good RNG will help us immensely, and that is showcased in this fight versus Dwight. Chitose started the fight with a knockback skill that knocked Dwight into 2 of the adds, causing extra collateral damage to all of them. Kiryu followed this up with a weapon attack, doing another good chunk of damage to Dwight, while killing one of the goons and leaving another critically low. Finally, Tomi got a lucky back attack on Dwight for some more lucky bonus damage. After Ichiban's turn, Dwight had already lost around a third of his HP simply due to favorable RNG. Tomi was soon after able to hit Dwight with his scrub down skill, which he is weak to. This put him at the halfway point in his health bar, where he activates his QTE. Even though I'm forced to fail it, there's really not much of a punishment for doing so. Ichiban gets stabbed for a whopping 50 damage. Dwight does actually get a decent strength buff in his heat mode. He did manage to kill Chitose, but he was so low that he didn't have enough time to get the ball rolling. One thing to note when we get to Chapter 5 is that the game forces us to do the tutorial for the Drink Link system with Tomizawa. I'm not able to do these normally, but because of the forced tutorial, Tomi is the only character that is able to unlock their tag team attack. After dicking around in the orphanage for a while like it's Yakuza 3, the first somewhat notable thing is the introduction to the Hawaiian Haunt dungeon. It's really easy, though the evil clown dude mini-boss was able to do a decent chunk of the party's health. There's a boss fight after this with some random guys, and it actually presented quite the challenge. For once, the party was actually struggling to take care of all the enemies while staying alive themselves. However, I was still able to beat this boss after a couple tries, and it was all because of good RNG. This boss's main gimmick is his counter stance. Counter stances were a pain in the ass to deal with in the last game, and that's still true here. His counter works most similarly to how Kiryu's rush counter did, where you can get one hit in before getting countered, though the counter can be bypassed with a grapple attack. This counter is still very dangerous because the party ignores it and will attack the boss anyway. Where the good RNG came into play in this attempt was in 2 main instances. In the first one, Kiryu hits a weapon attack on the boss for good damage, and the boss goes into his counter state. As you can see, Kiryu is still facing the boss, meaning that he will most likely go to attack him next turn, which is really bad. Luckily, on the next turn, Tomi knocks down an enemy next to Kiryu, which forces the AI to go for the grounded attack instead of attacking the boss. The second and far more impactful instance of good RNG was when the boss had about a third of his health left. Chitose did a basic attack on him, knocking him to the ground. Tomizawa tried to do a ground attack on him, but he got up just in time. This actually worked out in our favor though, because he got up in just the right position for Kiryu to land a back attack on him, which bounded him off the wall, allowing Tomi to hit a follow-up and letting Ichiban defeat him with a ground attack. From there, the party was easily able to defeat the rest of the goons. By the way, when I said only Tomi could unlock his tag team attack earlier, that was a lie. Kiryu gets his too, but his unlocks passively and we can only use it before he leaves Ichiban's party later. Ichi and the gang were barely able to avoid meeting God, but they sure did find a guy pretending to be him. But I'm sure it's no big concern. Anyways, we move into Chapter 6, where Ichiban records a viral YouTube poop.
My boy.
Haha, here's the problem. Too many
Dinner.
Japanese Yakuza in
And we now have to stop playing the game to go play Animal Crossing. I tried to speed through the Dondoko Island tutorial as fast as I could, but it still took me around 30 minutes. Ichiban returns to find his YTP finished, and while the party tries to figure out what to do next, they get ambushed by Yamai. This fight really wasn't hard though. I got everyone to level 26 and 27 just in case, but it wouldn't have made a huge difference either way. Unlike the first Jamai fight, neither of us are alone, though our new party members vastly outrank his goons. Yamai also seems to hard focus Kiryu in this fight, which isn't too bad because he has a lot of health, and Chitose will heal him constantly. I managed to win without Kiryu dying at all. Next thing we need to do is find Wang To, the leader of the Ganjo, to see what he knows about Akane's whereabouts. And well, that was a lot easier than I expected. What was a lot harder than expected though, is the actual fight against Wang To. The Wang To fight is in some ways similar to the Jungi fight from 7. He can poison you, which adds a big layer of RNG, he's got the ability to do crazy damage to multiple party members at once, and he's a huge spike in difficulty towards the middle of the game. He does have a few things that make him unique, however. He has ads, first of all, but he also has the ability to greatly boost his evasion and heal himself. Luckily, some of his crazy abilities are helped by infinite wealth having generally lower boss health and more opportunities for big damage. But this fight was still quite the tall order at our current level. It is, of course, also highly RNG dependent. Ichiban cannot get poisoned early on, and the party members need to focus on killing the ads when Wang To's evasion is high. My first attempt at this fight ended rather quickly, but somehow, on only my second attempt at this fight, it seemed like I had the miracle run. I was lucky enough for both Tomi and Kiryu to have their hype meters charged in this fight, and on this attempt, Kiryu immediately let his tag team attack rip, to which Tomi followed up with a ground attack. This was actually a good time for it, because tag team attacks bypass evasion buffs. Wang To used Venom Slicer, which hit both Kiryu and Ichiban, but neither of them were poisoned. After a few more good hits, Tomi decided to use his as well, which did some very good damage as Wang To is weak to gun. Wang To then reapplied his evasion buff, but Kiryu was able to bypass it by knocking a goon into him. This activated the QTE, which I then promptly failed for a whopping 70 damage penalty. Unfortunately, as soon as he entered his heat mode, he killed Tomi, though Ichiban was able to revive him. Thankfully, Ichiban's revival skill was changed from Yakuza 7 to make it work 100% of the time, so I didn't have to worry about it failing. I hate to say it, but Tomi was starting to become a bit of a liability. While he does have strong elemental coverage, he doesn't use these skills half the time, and even then, he struggles to keep up with the other party members' damage outputs due to him having the worst weapon by far, and because of his low health and inability to heal himself, he starts to die a lot. One thing that hasn't really been relevant until now is Kiryu's ability to do heat actions, specifically Essence of Stand Crush in this particular fight. Kiryu can perform heat actions in brawler style depending on many factors like his and the enemy's positions, the specific properties of the arena, what objects are present, and even how much health he has, and they do a crap ton of damage. Like I said, Kiryu is able to do Essence of Stand Crush in this fight, and it is a crucial source of damage which can be done as many times as he wants as long as he and the enemy are in the right spot. I say this because he was able to land one on Wang To for a lot of damage. Tomi was next, and he ended up using his fire skill, which is rather strong, but it did even more damage due to Wang To being weak to fire and the fact that it bounded him. He finally decided to activate his heal state, and he unfortunately poisoned Ichiban. Ichi barely survived an attack from him, but he was quickly healed by Chitose. By this point, he had healed quite a bit, but a couple more attacks from Tomi and another heat action from Kiryu got him back down low. Things were getting really close though. As Chitose was dead, Ichiban was paralyzed, and everyone was quite low. Maybe the most unbelievable thing since Jungi tanking God's right hand happened after that, when Ichiban somehow survived Hornet's Hive solely due to weird hitbox shenanigans. But even with this crazy luck, they were just barely unable to close it out. This was soul-crushing. I wanted to beat this fight at our current level, but I knew I was unlikely to get that kind of RNG again. So I gave it a few more tries, but after attempt number 6, I gave in and did some leveling. I knew that if I was that close to level 27, I didn't need many more levels, so I got everyone to level 28 and 29, and I was able to complete the fight in just a few attempts. The party got some good damage right off the bat, and Kiryu was even able to inflict Wang To with bleed. He then used Venom Slicer, which poisoned Kiryu and Chitose. This isn't great, but it's still manageable as long as Ichiban isn't affected. They actually focused on the goons, and were able to get an extra hit on him due to collateral damage despite his buff. Things looked pretty bad when Wang To went for another Venom Slicer, which got everyone pretty low, though no one else was poisoned. Chitose barely survived, but she was able to gradually refill everyone's health. By this point, Both her and Kiryu had gotten over their poison as well. Another string of attacks puts him into phase 2, and there was another close call with Ichiban. He was able to heal himself with help from Chitose though, and things started to look up again when Wangto used Storm Chaser, which accidentally put him in the perfect position for Kiryu to use Essence of Stand Crush, which did massive damage. In fact, being in this corner with everyone would basically be a death wish for him, especially once his buff wore off. Chitose hits a back attack, Kiryu follows up with a ground attack, and Ichiban does a standard attack which causes Chitose, Kiryu, and Tomi to all do an RNG follow-up attack all at once. Tomi hit one more ground attack, and despite Wangto reapplying his evasion buff, Kiryu was able to get good enough RNG to bypass it and finish the fight with a Tiger Drop. There's a couple more standard encounters to close out the chapter, though there wasn't a chance to heal, so I did lose Kiryu and Tomi. By the ending cutscene, Tomi has to leave to go find a vehicle. Oh, I hope we're not gonna do the bit in every crummy RPG where we get a major boss encounter while one of our party members is gone. Oh no, it's one of those crummy RPGs where we get a major boss encounter while one of our party members is gone. Whew. Wow. I thought this was one of those crummy RPGs where we get a major boss encounter while one of our party members is gone. I knew this was one of those crummy RPGs where we get a major boss encounter while one of our party members is gone. This fight is the definition of bad. There's a ton of goons, we haven't had an opportunity to grind, we of course are missing a party member, and Yamai has some new tricks up his sleeve. He still has the double turn bullshit, but now using the power of Kiwami, he can even inflict us with burn. So basically, we're fucked. Or at least we would be if this was Yakuza 7. This fight is actually balanced around us only having 3 people. The goons are all pretty weak, and Yamai has very low health. All it took was a bit of RNG for us to do it. Yamai was able to lay down some decent damage, but it wasn't even close. Especially since Kiryu had his tag team attack, which raises both his and Ichiban's attack. Sorry Yamai fans, he still has yet to be a real threat. Kiryu, unfortunately, falls victim to the Kiwami, and we have to leave without him. Despite having Tomi back, we still have an empty slot in our party, but that looks like it won't be a problem for long, as Nanba and Adachi are in town to help us out. That's great, but there's only room for one of them. Adachi's great for his raw damage output and high health pool, but Nanba is a good healer and has some good magic skills. Overall, I think Adachi's a little bit better in this circumstance, as Nanba's strengths are mostly covered by Tomi and Chitose. The game does automatically put Nanba in the party though, so we'll have to settle with him for now. Next, we have to go rescue Kiryu, who's currently being held in Yamai's territory. The long battle, as per usual, isn't bad, but it seems like Yamai himself has decided to lock in and is actually a major problem. I hadn't leveled up any further, and Yamai was able to kill Tomi and Nanba before even going into his heat mode where his attacks become way stronger. This time, he also has the hostesses that will give him buffs and heal him, so this fight wasn't even close. Yamai enters heat mode fairly early on, and it makes his attacks far stronger, while also changing their animations. This is most notable for Keel Hauler, which becomes a giant spin attack that has a high chance of hitting 3 or 4 party members. I tried this fight again at level 35, and it was very close. Yamai was able to do some very serious damage, but the party was able to manage. Later on in Yamai's heat phase, he will gain some extra skills, like Iron Squall, which does a ton of damage and can inflict stun, and what do you know, he also gets a counter stance. This one works like Ishioda's from 7, where you're generally able to finish your entire attack before getting countered, but it is still completely unsustainable for the party to keep attacking him while he's in his counter stance. I got some decent RNG in this attempt, as Chitose got an attack debuff on Yamai from Triple Corsage twice in a row, and Tomi was able to bypass Yamai's counter stance with his tag team attack. But Yamai had unfortunately decided to target Ichiban while he was low, leading to a loss. My next attempt didn't get nearly the same kind of RNG. The best thing that happened was Tomi using Scrub Down twice in a row into an attack debuff from Triple Corsage. Tomi ended up dying, and Ichiban was unable to revive him, so it was just him, Nanba, and Chitose for a good chunk of the fight. It was looking very bad, but between making good use of their heals and getting very lucky on the final turn, the party was barely able to pull out a win. On said final turn, Yamai had elected to use Go Batshit, which lowers everyone's defense, and Iron Will. the charge move that allows him to use Iron Squall. Had he decided to use an attack, there would probably have been another casualty, especially due to the defense debuff. The fight with Yamai sparks a major shift in the game and the run. Kiryu now leaves Ichiban's party permanently in order to return to Japan. Nanba goes with him, and the game is kind enough to auto-place Adachi into her party in his stead. Starting in the next chapter, Chapter 8, we will have to deal with Kiryu's party back in Japan alongside Ichiban's party. Chapter 8 begins with a large amount of unimportant bullshitting that isn't really relevant to the run. Though it is worth noting that, alongside Kiryu and Nanba, we now have Sonhee and Sayako. Sonhee is pretty good. She has a lot of blade, gun, and electric skills that'll give us some good coverage, though she isn't that bulky. Sayako is, well, Sayako, but she is a little better than she was in Yakuza 7. She has a somewhat expanded array of actual combat options, but at the end of the day, she's still a support character who refuses to use support skills. Apart from this, we also unlock Kiryu's memories, bucket list, and his awakening skills. Memories and the bucket list are mostly irrelevant, as we can't go out of our way to do them, but there are a few mandatory ones that we must do. Awakening skills will be passively unlocked from various challenges like talking to people and using taxis, as well as from the few mandatory memories and such. But the only ones that matter for the run are the soul unlocks, as these pertain to the brawler style. One of the forced memories is the one against, supposedly, Joe Amon. This is a forced loss, but it is also the tutorial for Dragon's Resurgence, which counts as playing the game, so any usage of it outside of this tutorial is not allowed. As long as the game doesn't force us to use it or something, we'll be fine. As far as actual combat encounters though, there's really only one right at the end of the chapter, which isn't all that difficult, and that segues us into Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is, for the most part, just a long series of combat encounters that don't pose much of a threat. We're forced to go visit Yamai again, and he's not super happy about the intruders on his lawn, so we team up to beat them down. This fight is really easy, but afterwards, Ichiban pisses him off, so we have to fight him yet again. Yamai is really not fucking around this time. He's somehow a lot stronger than his last fight just 2 chapters ago, his attacks now have a chance to inflict burn, and his goons are all pretty strong in their own right. Yamai starts out in his heat mode in this fight, so he's able to dish out a crap ton of damage while the party is busy dealing with his plethora of underlings. At our current level, we got our asses kicked. I had to get everyone 15 levels above Yamai before they even stood a chance, and they still took a loss to bad RNG. On the next attempt, the party was able to take care of the ads without doing too terribly. A few people did get low, but luckily, Chitose had unlocked a far better healing skill, which was able to mitigate the damages. This is important because, on top of Yamai's damage buffs, he also has an improved version of Iron Squall, taking an already strong move and making it absolutely insane. He's still able to lower the entire party's defense as well, just to add insult to injury. I got some pretty good RNG early on with this though, as right after Yamai used Go Batshit, Adachi was low, so Chitose healed him. Everyone was also grouped closely together, so everyone else was also hit by the heal. Chitose's new healing skill, Aperitifs, also has the secondary effect of removing any status debuffs, so the entire party was able to go back to normal. Unfortunately though, this did use up all of Chitose's remaining MP, so she wouldn't be able to heal again if needed until she got some back. Yamai started to go pretty crazy after this though. He attacked Tomi, and then used his second turn to start charging Iron Squall. The party sent him into the QTE after this, where Ichiban gets his skull smashed in by a crowbar. 100 damage. Yamai immediately lets Iron Squall rip after this, hitting Ichiban and both stunning and burning him. He then burns Chitose as well. The party started to act really stupidly after this, as they were constantly hitting his guard without using any grapple skills. He then went into a counter stance, at which point all of the non-stunned party members still insisted on using nothing but melee attacks. Luckily, Ichiban finally got out of his stun, and both him and Chitose healed everyone up. Yamai also decided to stop being so defensive after this, so the party was able to get some good damage going again. Ichiban and Chitose were both completely out of MP at this point, so they couldn't heal anymore. But Yamai was pretty low, so it wasn't a huge issue. He popped his counter stance one last time, but Tomi decided to stylishly finish him off with his tag team attack. Unfortunately for us, shit gets bad. We're finally able to find Akane and Lani, but not even 30 minutes later, they get kidnapped because this fucker is a spy. Kiryu does get 50 soul points for seeing Hanawa's corpse though, so who's the real loser here? Snapping back to Kiryu and the gang, Zhao ends up joining the party, and almost as if the game knows what challenge I'm doing, he automatically replaces Sayako. Zhao was completely irrelevant in Yakuza 7 because he was never automatically placed into the party, but Infinite Wealth is a much different story, as we will be sticking with him for the rest of the game. In fact, this is the final party setup for Team Japan, and it's probably the best one we could ask for. Zhao is pretty strong, and helps bring up the total damage output of the party way better than Sayako, and we're gonna need all of the advantages we can get considering who we're facing next. I did some precautionary grinding to about level 40, because it's time for the revenge of none other than Joe Sawashiro. I skipped his first fight in 7, and called his second fight easy, so he is pissed. It was very obvious that even level 40 was not enough to take this guy down. It only took a few turns before Kiryu straight up died. Granted, that was likely due to him enraging 3 enemies by using Essence of Komaki Master, but I still knew that this wasn't going to happen at our current level. I tried again at level 50, and... Joe, I'm sorry. I really like you, but you're a victim of Infinite Wealth's game design. You're the first boss of Kiryu's section, and you're fighting against the strongest character in the game, the guy with the most busted heal in the game, and 2 freshly recruited party members with actually good equipment. Your damage and health are crazy nerfed from Yakuza 7 even with your new movesets. The party was able to pretty easily beat this fight with little issue. There were a couple scares with Kiryu, but Nanba was able to keep everyone topped off since Stashed Bottle is such a good heal. Apparently, they had also randomly obtained a Toughness ZZ while grinding, which Sunhee gave to Kiryu. As hard as he tried, this fight only took 1 attempt. Sorry, Joe. Switching back to Team Hawaii in Chapter 11, Chitose pulls a Nanba and leaves the party, but it is a bit of a false alarm, as she shows back up 3 fights later. Soon after, though, we get a long battle, but for this one, there's actually some things worth talking about. Right at the beginning is the return of the Excavator from Yakuza 7. Except this time, there's 2 of them. Despite how much of a nightmare they were to deal with in the previous game, they have been severely nerfed here both in damage and health. They also no longer have double turns. It seems that Ichiban and the gang are Excavator racist, as this is the only time in the whole game that the party members will exclusively attack one enemy before the other, first targeting the blue Excavator. This is the one fight where I almost wish they didn't do that though, as when one of the Excavators goes down, the other unlocks the Power Swing and Earthquake attacks, which were the most dangerous ones from the last game, and continue to be in this game. They're still far less potent in this game, however, so the party was able to pull through this fight after a few attempts, though it was fairly close. That's not all for this long battle though, as when Tomi decides to drive the Excavator into El Dorado, the party is split and has to fight 2 different groups of enemies at the same time. Ichiban and Chitose are on top, while Adachi and Tomi are on the bottom. There's a mini-boss on the top floor that's pretty strong, alongside a ton of enemies that either have cans of liquid nitrogen or literal dynamite that they can throw at you that do a ton of damage. You can probably guess, but this fight is going to rely on RNG. You have to hope and pray that Ichiban and Chitose can hold out for long enough so that Tomi and Adachi can finish dealing with their side and can go help them. Combined with the insane damage output that all these guys have, the AI has to be absolutely perfect with their heals so that they don't die halfway through. I was only able to get to the point where Tomi and Adachi finished off their side once, at which point everyone was low and neither Chitose nor Ichiban had any MP to heal, so they died. The RNG needed to do this fight at level 47 is completely unreasonable, so I loaded a save and tried again at level 55. This level increase made all the difference, as the party was able to first try this fight. This also extended to the mini-boss at the end of the long battle, but not to the slightly less mini-boss but not quite regular sized boss right after it. This time, the game handicaps us in a different way. The entire room is filled with poison gas. This gas is incredibly potent, doing 160 damage per turn to all party members. The gas can be cleared by destroying the generators, but the AI will rarely actively target them, which is a huge problem. On my first attempt, the party had gotten down to just the sorta mini-boss and like 1 goon before even destroying the first generator. It wasn't even intentional, it just so happened to be in the line of fire when Tomi used his tag team attack. Adachi tried to destroy the second one, but he died from poison damage before he could. Once again, this fight is exceptionally RNG susceptible, as you have to rely on the party accidentally hitting the generators enough to destroy them. The next attempt looked pretty promising, as they were able to hit the first generator a ton in the beginning, though it was up to Adachi to pick up the slack again later. The party was able to reach the QTE on this attempt, though this allows the kinda boss to start using a move called saturation bombing, where he just throws a ton of grenades everywhere. This, combined with the party still ignoring the second generator, meant that it wasn't going to happen this time either. But then, wouldn't you know it, on attempt number 4, the party was able to destroy both generators by some extreme stroke of luck. This was, of course, partially due to Adachi actually having some sense, alongside some lucky strays, and Tomy somehow deciding to target the second generator with his tag team attack. Like I expected, once the burden of constantly being poisoned was no longer in play, the party was easily able to beat the fight once and for all. We finally hit chapter 12, and while there are a few mandatory sub-stories to start out this chapter, there's one big event in here that I'm sure you've been waiting for. That's right, the long-awaited fight against the Jima trio. I tried this fight at level 58, and let's just say that I got my ass handed to me so hard that I didn't even think about trying again until everyone was at level 75. Before I get into any details, I will preface that, similar to the game as a whole, this fight is much easier than its Yakuza 7 equivalent. Majima and Saejima function similarly to how they did in that game. Majima will hit just about everyone, and will periodically summon his shadow clones. The clones function a little differently than they did in 7, however. Only 2 will be summoned, but Majima will summon them more than once. They are far weaker though, and it isn't helped by the fact that they're weak to physical attacks. Saejima turtles just about as much as he did in the previous game, but while in Yakuza 7 he was like an alligator snapping turtle, being both incredibly defensive and insanely powerful, he is more like a common snapping turtle in Infinite Wealth. He can do damage, and is kinda bulky, but let's be real. Daigo is also kinda just there. He doesn't really do anything special. He does have a counter stance, but other than that, he's mostly just there to be another guy to fight. Majima can apply himself with an evasion buff like Wong To, but this buff seems to be way less potent. Daigo will also give defense and willpower buffs to all 3 of them throughout the fight. Considering the grandeur and sheer magnitude of this fight, it's no surprise that RGG gave it a wholly unique mechanic. Whenever you're about to defeat one of them, they will refill their health and force you to go into Dragon's Resurgence to fight them one-on-one. I'm not going to beat around the bush. The run is dead. There is no way to beat this fight without manually defeating Majima, Daigo, and Saejima in Dragon's Resurgence, and that is a clear violation of the run's rules. So, unfortunately, our run will be ending here in Chapter 12. But because I don't want people to show up to my house with torches and pitchforks, I will be going through the rest of the game and seeing if we can still beat the final boss with just this little hiccup. My actual attempt at this fight had nothing major happen in the very beginning. The QTE shows up very early on in this fight, which is a forced 150 damage on Kiryu, and ironically has Nanba, Sunhee, and Zhao doing the heavy lifting, while Saeko sits back for emotional support. Since this is a triple boss fight and this isn't Yakuza 7, the total HP pool is split between all 3 Jimas, and thus, none of them have crazy high health or anything. As such, Daigo was already at half health just after the QTE. In fact, the party continued to lay the hurt on him, and he was at about a third of his health before anyone even got into the red themselves. The first person to do so was Nanda, but he of course has the ability to instantly restore all of his HP. By this point, Majima was beginning to fire up, as he'd popped his evasion buff and sent out his first wave of shadow clones. The party still wasn't done with Daigo, as Sunhee hit him with an electric attack twice, which he's weak to, and then Kiryu finished him off with Essence of Pistol, which did nearly 1,000 damage thanks to a crit. Now, even though the run has officially failed here, I still wanted to stay in the spirit of the run for the Dragon's Resurgence sections, so I asked my friend and roommate Winter to make me a program that will generate weighted random inputs during these sections, just so I can technically still not be playing the game. And honestly, the program really went off on Daigo. I'm assuming that these sections ignore your equipment and solely focus on your level, because the program was able to beat Daigo with just 2 combos while only taking a bit over 100 damage. At this point, Majima and Saejima were both around half health, and things started to go a bit bad. Saejima was able to stun Kiryu and Nanba with Mountain Crusher, which also put Kiryu in the red. Zhao and Sun Hee were able to get a lucky back attack, ground attack combo on Majima, but he re-upped his evasion boost and summoned more clones right after. Kiryu was able to get out of his stun pretty quickly, but Namba took his sweet time. Unfortunately, this meant that he wasn't able to heal Zhao, who did end up dying to Saejima. Namba does not have a revive skill in this game, so he's out permanently. Now that Majima was under half health, he started to get really trigger happy with the shadow clones, summoning more before the party could even get rid of both of the ones already present. Thankfully, these clones are far weaker than their Yakuza 7 counterparts, but they do still have the ability to paralyze you, which is exactly what happened to both Kiryu and Namba. Just like with Zhao, this meant that Sun Hee was unable to be healed and ended up dying as well. Kiryu was also about to die when Namba finally locked in and healed him. Majima summoned even more clones, but both of them had had enough, and they ended up getting him down to his Dragon's Resurgence phase the very next turn. Now, I unfortunately don't have much footage of the rest of the fight, as the program went rogue and started opening other programs and playing YouTube videos and shit, so a good bit of it looks like this. But by the end of the fight, Kiryu was just barely able to survive one last hit by Saejima, and finished him off with an ultimate essence. Luckily, you can't die during Dragon's Resurgence sections, so all I had to do was open up the program one last time, hoping it wouldn't gain a mind of its own again, and bask in the sweet taste of victory. Kind of. Challenges still failed. And somehow, that's not the end of Chapter 12. Team Japan pays a visit to the Seiryu Clan Tokyo branch, which is really just the former Tojo HQ. Normally, the ensuing long battle is on the tougher side for this game, but we had to level up so much for the Jima fight that it's not a challenge in the slightest. Even this fucking Sephiroth wannabe at the end is a complete joke. Though the fight does contain a forced QTE fail where Kiryu gets Kashiwagi. 160 damage. Moving into Chapter 13, we're back with Team Hawaii. We have to fight our way across the entire city again before taking refuge in a shrine. Out of nowhere though, none other than Jungi Han shows up and joins the party. Jungi was an instrumental party member back in Yakuza 7, so I hope he turns out the same here. The only bad part is that he ends up replacing Chitose, probably the worst party member he could have replaced. Now, we basically have zero healing capability, which is going to hinder us severely. Our next objective is to go back through District 5 to save Lani, and this, of course, means another long battle. I tried the long battle at our current level just to see if it would work. Everyone was still level 55 except Jungi, who joined at level 39. As expected, the long battle went fine, apart from this chainsaw mini-boss who is really strong for no reason. By the end of the fight, Ichiban and Tomi were both close to dying, and Jungi had died 3 times. The rest of the fights were done no sweat, but the end of the long battle sees us in a rematch with Dwight. Needless to say, this fight is way harder than the one in Chapter 4. Would you believe me if I said that this is the boss that gave me the most trouble in the entire run? The huge spike in difficulty comes from the combination of factors. Dwight himself is a lot stronger, he has a ton of very strong adds that take a lot of effort to take down, he can summon more of said adds, and we no longer have Chitose in the party, which severely limits our healing capability. Considering just how strong the enemies are now, the lack of Chitose really hurts, so we have to level up a lot more just to surpass this fight. The fight wasn't even close at level 55, but my first attempt at level 64 saw some pretty insane RNG. The party got a ton of back attacks on Dwight, and they were able to clear out the adds pretty swiftly, and Jungi both managed to paralyze and poison Dwight. By the end of this attempt, Dwight only had a small amount of health left, but it still ended in a loss. After a certain point, Ichiban is going to almost exclusively be healing whenever it's his turn. Not only is this a hit to our total damage output, but the healing still isn't enough to keep up with how much damage Dwight is putting out. What ends up happening is that the party members slowly die off one by one until it's just Ichiban, who has absolutely no chance of closing out the fight himself. With how close that first level 64 attempt was though, I knew that the party didn't need many more levels in order to beat Dwight, so I tried again at level 70. And although my first attempt ended tragically, with Ichiban just barely being in the explosion radius of a grenade aimed at Tomi, my second attempt started out very well. Tomi used Scrub Down twice and Fusey Doozy, both of which Dwight is weak to. Even after Dwight popped his heat mode and cleared his debuffs, Jungi got a lucky burn with a propane tank. I even got a super niche interaction where Adachi used breaking top next to Dwight while he was guarding, and since his guard prevented him from getting knocked away, he ended up taking more damage than he would have if he didn't guard. Unfortunately, this attempt also ended with Ichiban being at the wrong place at the wrong time. To be honest though, my winning attempt at this fight was very unremarkable. There wasn't anything particularly flashy or cool about it, and there really weren't any lucky moments. It was mostly just the party avoiding bad RNG. But hey, they still did it. Dwight actually shows up for a rematch not even 10 minutes later, but this fight was way easier and way less interesting. The party beat it first try, and that's due to a combination of factors, such as Dwight not using his more powerful skills, the ads being way less threatening in this fight, and the sharks generally working in our favor. With that out of the way though, we head to Kamurocho to try and find Yamai, who's probably going to find the old Tabata matriarch. Mysteriously, Jungi leaves the party, and he's replaced with Chitose. But then, after everyone has their reunion and they go back to Hawaii, suddenly he joins back and replaces Tomizawa? I have no idea why this happened, but having Chitose back is going to be a huge help. So here we are at the final chapter, and the list of what we need to do is pretty simple. Fight the shark, go through Nele Island, fight the squid, fight Bryce, go through the Millennium Tower, and fight Ebina. Now, considering how this run has gone so far, this might seem easy. Hell, we still got 24 levels to spare for Team Japan, and 29 for Team Hawaii. And you know what? It might have been. So I decided to alter the run just a little bit. For this entire chapter, I will have a bonus challenge. I must go through the rest of the game without any weapons or equipment. Any party members with armor equipped will have it removed, and all party members minus Kiryu will have their weapons swapped out for their base variants, which is a feature exclusive to Infinite Wealth. I'm hoping to push the game to its limits to see if this section is really possible. Bit of a disclaimer before we proceed though. I did actually lose a lot of footage of the Team Hawaii half of the finale, so a large part of that section will be using footage of an older attempt that doesn't quite line up with the final one. Bryce is intact, but the squid, the long battle, and the shark fights are sadly lost. Speaking of the shark though, we have to start the finale by beating down this thing. It's really not as bad as it looks though. RNG isn't as much of a factor in this fight as it is in other fights, because things like positioning, follow-ups, and collateral damage are completely irrelevant. The shark also has a very basic pool of attacks. It doesn't really have any particular kind of bullshit that we need to avoid, and it was beaten first try. On my first and only attempt, I was at level 80/81, Jungi managed to paralyze this 60-foot long megalodon for over half the fight, and the party only got low once, when the shark had no time to capitalize off of it. And well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the long battle across Nele Island is also a big pile of nothing. All of the basic encounters aren't able to pose any semblance of a challenge, and though some of the mini-bosses were a small threat, none of them are worth discussing. Sorry to any Hill or Akamu fans out there. But of course, as one last obstacle before getting to Bryce, we have to fight the giant squid. Now the squid, or as the game calls it, the Blessed Leviathan, is actually quite the roadblock. The attempt you're seeing is one I did at level 99, though I initially started it at level 80 like the rest of the long battle, and ended up completing the fight on my final attempt after fishing for good RNG at level 90. The squid has a whole grab bag of gimmicks, but the main one is that it can eat you. The biggest RNG factor in this fight is in who the squid decides to eat and when. When eaten, the party member or members who are in the squid's stomach will be inflicted with burn from the stomach acid for the entire duration of their voring. The only way they can get out is by destroying all of the ink sacs in the stomach. The first time someone is eaten, there will only be 2, but subsequent vorings will add more. Believe it or not, but under specific circumstances, getting vored is advantageous. Now, as much as I hate to say it, Ichiban has gone from perhaps our best party member in Yakuza 7 to probably the second worst one in Infinite Wealth, at least for Team Hawaii. Considering that the squid will hit everyone at once on basically every turn, having Ichiban be tucked away taking a flat amount of damage per turn, which he can heal, with little chance of dying, is actually a good trade-off. Conversely, having any of the other party members be eaten is very bad. Jungi and Adachi are crucial for their damage output, and Chitose cannot heal other people while in the stomach unless she is in there with them. It is also generally good for the party to target the squid itself rather than the tentacles. The tentacles will infinitely regenerate, and the only way to win the fight is by draining the health of the main body. Defeating the tentacles will temporarily stop them from attacking or voring someone, but if the party attacks them too much, they will die before they can kill the squid itself. I would like to go into more detail about this fight, but sadly all I have is a level 80 attempt where they got their ass beat, as well as the level 99 attempt where they beat the squid's ass. Like I said though, I was able to record my level 90 attempt at Bryce, but of course, before we can take on Bryce, we have to defeat his underlings. There's 2 waves of them, and they are way weaker than I was expecting for what is basically phase 1 of the Team Hawaii final boss. Bryce will do support during this phase in the form of summoning an extra goon every now and then, or throwing a grenade that will also damage some of his guys. The second wave of Palikana guys is a little more dangerous. There are chainsaw, flamethrower, and machine gun enemies, and Bryce will even summon extra guys with the specific purpose of kamikazeing themselves. Jungi actually took 2 of these and nearly died. This phase was still not much of a challenge though, and the party quickly made it to Bryce himself. The goons in this fight seemed to be able to put out some pretty decent damage, though the party had plenty of time to deal with them, as Jungi paralyzed Bryce on literally the first action in the whole fight. They actually almost exclusively targeted the ads in the beginning of the fight, while barely touching Bryce. This is especially good since, despite being at least 90 years old, Bryce actually has quite a bit of health, a rarity for an infinite wealth boss. By the time most of the goons are gone, both Ichiban and Adachi were paralyzed, and Bryce had an attack debuff. The party, having been injured from the fight with the Palikana elites, was starting to get pretty low, as Bryce could do a decent bit of damage on his own. With skills like Massacre or Hellfire's Beckoning, he can even hit every party member at once. Due to the nature of Bryce as a villain, an evil mastermind who hides behind his underlings, he's a pretty one-dimensional fight though. Once the zealots are gone, everyone just completely gangs up on him, and it's not even close. Bryce will, as a last resort, swap from dual-wield Uzis to a sword. This is mostly for thematic reasons though, and it makes him far weaker, and activates so late into the fight that it barely makes any difference. And with that somewhat anticlimactic final boss out of the way, we conclude the Hawaii section of the game at a nice and round level 90 using Ichiban, Jungi, Adachi, and Chitose. But Team Hawaii isn't the only one ready for a bombastic finale. Back with Team Japan, they're getting ready for the epic Millennium Tower finale number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. Unlike the Nele Island long battle, this one actually had a couple of encounters worth touching on briefly. Prepare for a bit of a lightning round. The fight outside the tower was easy, but the first fight inside of it was actually somewhat challenging. The first wave of enemies isn't too bad. There are some expected faces like chainsaw and grenade enemies, but nothing too bad. The second wave, however, contains 2 knife mini-bosses who were actually able to dish out quite a bit of damage. They're able to lower defense and cause bleed, which causes it to add up quickly. The first attempt actually ended in a loss, with everyone but Namba dying. A full restore and slightly better luck was all they needed to complete its second try though. There's another mini-boss soon after this who, while being somewhat strong, is really only notable for his gimmick, where he basically just uses Perish Song from Pokemon. It's far worse than Perish Song though, as it's not guaranteed to affect everyone. The first time he used it, it only affected Zhao, who did unfortunately die from it 3 turns later. The second time he used it, it hit Namba, but he was so low that the party finished him off before it could do anything. Later on, there's a scissor mini-boss who's a bit of a pain in the ass to deal with. For some reason, he has much higher than normal evasion, so your attacks will just completely miss about a third of the time. He can also buff his attack, lower everyone's defense, and hit multiple party members for 300 plus damage all at once, inflicting bleed in the process. Even with a full heal, this fight still got everyone pretty low, but no amount of bullshit can protect you from a drunk Namba with a rocket launcher. The Yakuza 4 fight is of course cool as fuck, but isn't really relevant to the run. The only other notable fight after this one is right before the fight against Ebina. These guys do probably the worst thing they could. They take advantage of the AI's stupidity. None of them are particularly strong, but the gimmick of this fight is that one of the guys can full heal the other ones at any time, meaning that you have to take him out before beating the other ones. The AI doesn't care about strategy, so they will attack all of them evenly instead of targeting the healer. The sad part is that these guys could easily be taken care of, but because the AI will not actively go for the healer, the fight dragged out for so long that the party straight up just died. They were able to complete it on their second try, but because of this oversight, the fight took nearly 8 whole minutes for them to finish. It was a very annoying way to cap off the long battle, but with that completed, there's only one thing left to do. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. This fight is beatable. The only reason I'm taking on Ebina at level 90 is because I tried it at level 99 and it was stupidly easy. I really didn't want to leave the video off on such a wet fart like that, so I wanted to see how low I could go, and I settled on level 90. And yeah, those 9 levels made a massive difference. You look at Ebina wrong and half your health is gone in one turn. Alongside his crazy damage, he can also apply a wide array of status effects, like sleep, bleed, and paralysis, and he can even heal himself in his sword phase. Believe it or not, this fight absolutely hinges on Nanba of all people. But at the same time, it also highlights one of his major weaknesses. This hasn't been a huge issue until now, but Nanba's healing skill, Stashed Bottle, has one major weakness to counteract what is otherwise an incredibly strong heal. It progressively intoxicates any party member who is healed. After 3 consecutive uses, Nanba and anyone else who has been hit with the heal 3 times will be completely drunk, and will lose control of their actions. At best, a drunk party member will do a standard attack, but much of the time they will simply stand there and do nothing. Considering how high Ebina's damage is, Nanba will have to heal a lot, and what party members get drunk and at what times can have drastic effects on the fight. Another important aspect of this fight is Ebina's weaknesses and resistances. He is either weak to or resistant to every damage type in the game aside from blunt. Crucially, his weaknesses also flip between phases. In his unarmed phase, he's weak to blade and electric, and resists fire, ice, and gun, whereas in his sword phase, he resists blade and electric and is weak to fire, ice, and gun. Overall, this means that phase 1 is a bit easier, but it does introduce some more RNG into the fight as well. Zhao is our second best attacker behind Kiryu, and both his basic attack and many of his skills are blade attacks. His damage is far superior in phase 1 because of this, and it is far better for him to do his unarmed skills in phase 2. Sun Hee is a very similar case, though she has few blunt attacks at all, and instead has a few electric skills which are good in phase 1, and a few gun skills which are better in phase 2. Nanba's damage is pretty negligible overall, but Kiryu is actually what I'd say is the main RNG factor. Kiryu doesn't have access to any elemental skills other than Essence of the Dragon God, which the AI refuses to use. He does have Essence of Dagger, a blade skill, though the AI doesn't seem very fond of this one. The most important skill that Kiryu has for this fight is Essence of Pistol, his only gun skill. This skill is quite powerful, but it is dependent on Kiryu using it in Ebina's sword phase. In his unarmed phase, when he resists gun, Essence of Pistol will do around 500 damage, which is okay, but not really worth the MP cost. If done in his sword phase, however, it can do well over 1000 damage and is vital to our success. Despite the odds, I was determined, and after around 3 hours of failed attempts, I finally got one that looked promising. The party started out with a couple strong blade attacks from Zhao, a strong skill from Sun Hee, and some extra damage from Kiryu. He did, unfortunately, decide to use Essence of Pistol right off the bat, which still did decent damage, but like I said, is better used in phase 2. Ebina ended up enraging Kiryu, which isn't too bad, but he also put Nanba to sleep at a somewhat inopportune time. Zhao and Sun Hee continued to lay on some good damage, and Nanba got woken up after being hit by Ebina. He was now in the red, meaning that he was guaranteed to heal on his next turn. This would actually have been good if Nanba used Stash Bottle, since everyone else is still doing decently on health, meaning there's a low chance that they would need to be healed again and risk getting drunk. However, Nanba has a separate skill called Power Slumber, which exclusively heals himself back to full without any drawbacks. So yeah, the one instance where it's better for him to use Stash Bottle, he doesn't. Of course, he had to on the very next turn anyway because Sun Hee was low. Zhao was able to lower Ebina's defense and raise his own attack, allowing him to get 1300 damage off from one use of Sanguine Blade Dance, followed by an extra 800 by Kiryu doing a ground attack. By the end of phase 1, Sunhee wasn't doing too great, but Kiryu did get some good RNG by actually deciding to use Essence of Dagger, which is both strong against Ebina and broke his guard, making it do some insane damage. There is, of course, a QTE that must be failed to go into phase 2, though it only does 200 damage. Let it be known that a punch from Ebina is 4 times as powerful as getting stabbed by 2 machetes at once. Kiryu decided to immediately pull out Essence of Pistol for a nice 1500 damage. Zhao was still putting out some okay damage despite Ebina's new resistance to blades, though Sunhee was asleep and unable to fight. Ebina's attacks in this phase are very powerful. Fall from Grace is an attack that hits everyone for 500 to 600 damage, Cripple the Manipura has a very high chance to paralyze whoever is targeted, and he can even heal himself for 1000 HP with Sanguine High. There was quite the close call with Kiryu, as he was paralyzed and was targeted by Ebina multiple turns in a row. He was under 200 HP and had to be healed immediately. After a few more decently strong attacks, it even happened again. Luckily, Namba's drunk level had reset, and he was in the perfect spot to hit everyone with Stashed Bottle. The party was in another bad spot soon after this though. Kiryu and Namba were both completely drunk, and Zhao was paralyzed. Even after Kiryu sobered up, Zhao got paralyzed again, and Namba focused on healing Kiryu instead of Zhao and Sunhee. As such, Zhao ended up dying, and Sunhee was critically low and afflicted with bleed. Ebina then healed and used Fall from Grace to kill Sunhee. I was getting really worried about this attempt, but theoretically, it was still possible. Kiryu essentially negated the heal by using Essence of Pistol again, and Ebina had decided to target Namba twice in a row. This let Kiryu use Essence of Kali Sticks for a good 700 damage, and after Ebina attacked Namba the second time, he was lined up perfectly for a 1300 damage back attack from Kiryu, which sent him into the final QTE. And with Ebina beaten, the Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth beating itself run is... oh, well shit, this QTE loops infinitely. Good thing I worded that rule in a very specific way. Let's try that again. The Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth beating itself run is officially... still challenge failed because of the Jima fight. Sorry.